All right, you analytics rabble-rousers, grab your seats. I want to thank Vince Gennaro for inviting us to speak here today. We're deCervo. I started up this company with my partner, Jordan Maraskin, back at Columbia. We were doing some work on looking at how people make quick decisions. Started realizing that we could look at baseball. And what I'll be going through today is specifically our work with NCAA, Major League players, minor league players. deCervo itself is more a company that focuses on looking at decisions on a neural level. Today, though, we'll be focusing mostly on entirely on baseball. So really what I want to emphasize with this is that it's all about measuring prediction, right? It's about measuring trajectory prediction. Okay, so our approach to measuring hitting is to measure trajectory prediction. And I'm sure quite a few people in this room are familiar with this book, Nate Silver's book, The Signal and the Noise. So I would keep that idea in your mind, the signal and the noise. We think that we're getting very close to what the trajectory prediction signal, right? That signal that gives you a measurement of how a hitter does up at the plate. And we're going to relate that to the kinds of on-field metrics, which are a little noisier, a little further away from the trajectory prediction signal, and see how they're related to one another. So what we'll be going through is showing you the deCervo baseball profile, which is, maybe you could turn on the lights up here so that people can see the screen, I think, a little better. Yeah. But the profile has measurements in there: pitch recognition accuracy, their strike zone accuracy, how well they call balls and strikes, how quickly on a neural level they decide to swing at a ball, how quickly on a neural level they decide to take on a pitch, right? And what we'll be going through is showing you how the deCervo baseball profile metrics relate to on-field performance metrics. So we're going to cover things like Z-contact, on-base percentage, things like that. And what I'll be emphasizing is that the differences with these on-field metrics in terms of how they relate to our profile metrics has to do with their proximity to the trajectory prediction signal. And I'll get into that a little more later, but basically Z-contact being something better than OBP. I'll give you some examples of Major League players, some examples from NCAA, and then I'll go into what's under the hood, really where all this research came from, starting back at Columbia, where we'll look at a study that we did with NCAA Division I players measuring EEG and fMRI, where we found that the players' brains respond quicker, they respond stronger in terms of visual recognition areas, motor areas that are relevant for predicting the trajectory of a ball and then deciding whether they should swing at it or not. And then showing how that connection is really what is the important thing to measure when it comes to hitting, not just how good of a set of eyes the player has. It's really how their visual system connects to their motor system on a neural level. So just to recap it for you, this is your hitter, okay? He's got a brain in there, whether you believe it or not. And the further you get away from that brain is the further you're getting from trajectory prediction, okay? And so there are different ways that you can measure how well that batter is hitting, right? How well they're predicting trajectories of balls. There's the on-field metrics, right? And then as you start getting closer, you can measure things like behavioral metrics. That's accuracy, that's response time to pitches, how quickly they started moving towards a ball. Then you can measure things on a neural level like EEG. So that's actually what we measure. You can dive even deeper with MRI, okay? And I'll touch on a little bit of that. And then there's going really fancy, you can do simultaneous EEG and fMRI, where you get the temporal and spatial resolution. So you see, as you get closer to the brain, you get more resolution in terms of the trajectory prediction signal. From practical purposes, we have to settle on behavioral and EEG, because you can't carry an MRI machine into a Major League clubhouse. So what we do is we come with a suitcase like this. This is our EEG system right here, and a laptop, and we simulate it for players on a laptop. And the ultimate aim, of course, is that those metrics then relate to the on-field metrics. Okay? So just keep that in mind. The deCervo baseball profile is in our version 1 right now. And to give you a layout how we get to the baseball player profile metrics that are shown here, behavioral metrics, neural metrics, we start with the pitch data, okay, and we simulate that data. So whether it's pitch FX data, whether it's a recreation of curveball trajectories, slider trajectories, things like that, we simulate it, and we put that into a video game. So they have to do things like recognize different types of pitches, recognize balls and strikes, and they have to tap the screen or they have to tap a button on the computer as quickly as they recognize a pitch they're sitting on or a strike. We do simultaneous brain imaging. So this is a player, a major league player, wearing that cap actually right there. And they look at a bunch of pitches, say about 400 pitches. Takes about 20 minutes for each profile, so a total of about 45 minutes. The output is a player-specific neural profile where we measure pitch and strike recognition. And the kinds of metrics that go into that profile are shown on the right here. So we have behavioral metrics like strike recognition, their accuracy in recognizing different types of pitches, fastball, curveball, sliders. On the neural side, what moment in the trajectory they decided that the ball was a strike? What moment in the trajectory they decided that, yes, that's a curveball coming towards them? We have a measurement before the pitch comes in terms of preparedness on a neural level, how prepared they are, in other words, how in the zone they are. And what we do is we graph these metrics because none of you guys are neuroscience specialists, right? And so what we do is we graph this into the baseball space. In other words, what you're seeing here is as the trajectory of the ball goes from the pitcher on the left to the catcher on the right, what we map on there is how often the player decided to swing on a neural level. That's what's on the top plot. How often he decided to take on a neural level. That's on the middle plot. And then on the bottom plot, that's when he actually physically made the decision to swing. Okay, so what does that tell you if you look at that really quickly? The neural decisions to swing happen on average 31 feet from release. Okay, now go down to the physical decision to swing. When does that happen? That happens later. Okay, that happens 8 feet from release. So in those 7 feet, the ball is traveled as the player's nervous system is making the connection from the visual recognition that this is a pitch I want to swing at to the motor execution that this is a pitch that I'm going to actually start swinging at. Okay, and this is what we do for all the players that work with us. So what I'm going to be focusing on here today is how our profile metrics, the kind of things we've been gathering over the last year, relate to on-field metrics. And I'm going to go through a series of case studies here. So in our first look at profile versus on-field metrics, I'm going to look at some major league and minor league players together. This was a case study with an organization. All the teams we work with request confidentiality, so I can't tell you who. But this was with, they gave us 12 players. They told us afterwards who were the major leaguers and who were the minor leaguers. And so we looked at just the behavioral metric side first. So we looked at things like how accurately they recognized different pitches, how quickly they physically decided to move in terms of response times, right? And so one variable will never really tell you the whole story, okay? We were talking about earlier about, everyone wants a simple story here, but there's really a lot of complexity going on here. So if we look at just one variable at a time, we look at behavioral accuracy on the X margin there, right? You see your reds and your blues, your major leaguers and your minor leaguers pretty much overlap, right? Then if you look at another metric, you look at response times, you see also major leaguers and minor leaguers pretty much, they overlap. But now when you plot these two groups together, you see that you can draw a line right through the middle of these points, okay, separating your major leaguers and your minor leaguers. And what do you see? Well, you see that as you go away from that line, you go up and to the left in your major league quadrant, you get higher accuracy, lower response times, all right? They're making their decisions faster and more accurately. Minor leaguers, as you go away from that line, what do you see? They get longer response times, lower accuracy. Now, these are just general trends. I'm not saying it's always going to be like this, but this is what we saw in one case study. Next, Major League Baseball. Okay, so this is where we had 8 players across 2 different organizations. Now, we picked 2 on-field metrics that we thought would be as close as possible to trajectory prediction, okay? We picked Z-contact and out-of-zone swing fraction. Now, why do we only pick 8 players? Well, we've worked at this point with over 100 professional players, maybe about 50 NCAA players. Of all those players, that comes out to around, 30, 40 million brain responses that we've looked at. And because we're sampling 250 times a second, pitch takes 500 milliseconds to come to the plate, right? And so what you're seeing here, even though you're looking at 8 points on a graph here, this is actually the summary over 400 by 8 pitches, right? So a lot of pitches and a lot more data points, to tens of thousands of brain data points. And so you take out-of-zone swing fraction in the top plot, you take Z-contact in the bottom plot, and you plot those against the kind of things we're measuring, our neural metrics, right? So what are we putting on the x-axis here? Well, we've got, remember before, our neural decisions to swing, right? Where the ball is when the player decided on a neural level to swing, right? Where the ball was on a neural level when the player decided to take. And then what we do is we take the ratio of those two. So we call that the swing to take ratio, and that's what's plotted on the x-axis here. So we throw down those points, right? And we say, all right, is there a trend here? Well, maybe there looks like you could do like a parabola fit on this bottom one here, maybe another parabola fit on this other one here. So let's naively train a regression algorithm, leave one out cross-validated, right, because we want to be sensitive to outliers, and see what we get. Well, for the out-of-zone swing fraction, we get 9% relative error. For the z-contact, even better, 4% relative error. What does that mean? Okay, well, with the z-contact, they've got to actually make contact with the ball, right, when it's in the zone. So that is a very small margin of error. When it's out-of-zone swing percentage, that means they just got to not swing at things that are out of a much bigger zone, right? So a little farther away from on-target trajectory prediction. So what are we seeing here? The better fit is for the z-contact, right? You still have a pretty good fit for the out-of-zone swing fraction too, right? What's also important here is look at the optima that were found by these two fits. They found the exact same optima. In other words, at exactly around 0.72 swing to take decision ratio, you're getting the maximum z-contact and the minimum out-of-zone swing fraction. So these were independently trained regression lines, and they're finding the exact same minimum. In other words, there's something about this profile metric that we're measuring that's showing up on field. What else do we see? All right, well, let's look at NCAA and Major League players. Same thing with behavioral metrics. We find these consistency of the optima now across different levels of players. You're looking at NCAA versus Major League players. So in this third case study, we had 10 NCAA Division I players. Why do we only have 10? Well, because we needed players that had at least 100 at-bats. And so we also, one thing we did here is we transformed strikeouts to log strikeouts because, you know, some players, they strike out a lot. So when you do that, you see that you get this really nice linear fit here in terms of response time. So that's how quickly they physically decided to commit on pitches that they thought they recognized, and strikeouts. In other words, the more they rushed to judgment, in other words, they had really fast response times, they had not just higher strikeouts, they had exponentially higher strikeouts. But then what happens when you compare this to how the major leaguers did? So you take that same metric on the x-axis, response time, right? You compare that to your out-of-zone swing fraction again. You have a very similar curve to what you saw before for the swing-to-take decision ratio. Not only that, but you see that they're also finding low error, of course, but also the same minimum, right? Different levels of play. So these are NCAA Division I players and Major League players taking the same profile, and we see that their optimum performance on the field, whether they're playing Division I or they're playing Major League, is being measured by the same profile metric, all right? That's a big deal because one thing you can't do is make a control experiment when it comes to measuring how good of a hitter a guy is, right? The situation is different. The cloud cover is different. The shadows are different. The pitcher is different, right? Now we've got a universal measuring stick that we can compare each player on. A little more, profile versus on-field for NCAA, we can dive now into the behavioral and the neural together. Now you see these aren't exactly fantastic fits, right? Well, it's because we're measuring the kind of things on field that are only publicly available. So you got like on-base percentage, right? And this is recalculated from at-bats, not plate appearances, because that's what was publicly available. But we see basically the same kind of trends that you'd expect, right? On the y-axis, you got on-base percentage. On the x-axis, on the left plot, you've got behavioral performance. In other words, how accurately they're calling their pitches, right? On-base percentage increases with higher behavioral performance. The right plot is another compound metric on the neural side. It's called the decision reflex, right? So we test reflexes all the time, physical response time, reflex time, things like that. But what we're doing is we're taking, remember before, we've got the measurement of when they decided to swing on a neural level, when they decided to take on a neural level, when they actually physically decided, right? So what we do is we take the difference between their physical decision and their neural decision, which is measured in distance, and we call that the decision reflex. So like before I said, the player decided that the ball was a strike 31 feet from release on average. He actually physically moved when the ball was 38 feet, so the decision reflex there would be 7 feet, right? So we do that same kind of calculation across our players, and we basically see that the quicker decision reflex time, in other words, shorter distance from making the decision on a neural level to connecting it on a physical level, results in a higher on-base percentage. We see similar kind of trends also when you go to more players, right? So once again, noisy data. We're looking at on the y-axis here batting average, right? But we filtered once again to players that had at least 150 at-bats to reduce the noise a little bit. And now this is almost 50 minor league players. Same trends that you saw just now with the NCAA players. Increasing batting average with increasing accuracy and calling different pitches at this profile. And then increasing batting average with quicker decision reflex time. So what does this all mean? Same trends. So where's this all coming from, I think, is really the next question, right? We're seeing some correspondence in terms of what we're measuring and what's being measured on the field, publicly available to everybody. Over the course of a season, we measure it in 20 minutes. But what's really going on in the hood? What allows us to do this? Well, it's because we're able to tap into what's going on a neural level with these players. And so this is showing you how we measure it on EEG level. So that's like with something that fits in that suitcase right there. So we did a study where we had 11 NCAA Division I players and then age, gender-matched controls, and we looked at how their decision-making changed using high-density EEG. This is not high-density EEG. This is low-density. We used high-density EEG, which measures 64 points on the head, electrical activity. This measures 9. And so using this high-density EEG, we looked at when the decisions to swing were made in our players versus our non-players, when the decisions were made to take in our players and our non-players. And we see from this that the players decide stronger, they have more deflection downward, and sooner. They peak sooner, both on their decisions to swing and their decisions to take, right? When you combine them, you see when you can, look at both decisions together, you can see that very clearly here where the players have a stronger decision signal and it's happening sooner than the non-players. That's the kind of stuff that we're tapping into on an EEG level. So that's the timing, right? What about the where it's happening in the brain part? Now, EEG isn't great at that, but you can use some techniques to find the really strong signals. And that's where we can look at the neural decisions to take, the neural decisions to swing, and localize where these are happening on average. And what we see is that for the players, they have stronger activity in the supplementary motor area, SMA. Now, this area is right underneath the top of the skull. And what that means actually is that when the player decides not to swing, he has to slam on the brakes on a neural level. And that's what we're seeing in the SMA. That's what happens in the SMA. The SMA is involved in motor imagery, in planning, and eventual execution. And so what we see is when the players decide not to swing, they've increased activity in the SMA. What about when they decide to go on a pitch? Well, you see activity, stronger activity in the players, once again, not in the non-players, in orbital frontal gyrus, that's the OFG. That's something that's involved in working memory, execution, decision execution, right? FG, fusiform gyrus, that's involved in object recognition. So what you see is that there's actually a whole construct of areas involved in the brain when it comes to predicting a pitch, right? You have to recognize an object, you have to execute on that object, then you have to connect it all to the motor side, right? We get even more under the hood when we start looking with EEG fMRI. Remember, now this is right next to the player's brain, basically, in that first slide, right? And so what you see is that as the ball goes from the pitcher to the catcher, you actually see this spatiotemporal map, right, in terms of areas that correlate positively and negatively with expertise of the player. And those regions that you see there in blues and oranges and stuff like that, I'm not going to get too much into them, but all it should illustrate for you is that seeing a ball and hitting it isn't just seeing it, right? It's recognizing the object. It's connecting it to the motor side. It's recognizing that this thing is moving this way and not that way. It's got horizontal motion more than vertical motion. All these areas are involved here, and they're all unfolding in this kind of sequence. So it's not just vision training, right? This is getting way under the hood here, right? We're figuring out what parts of the brain are involved, when they're involved, that connects the visual object recognition, the motion recognition, to the actual decision execution, or if you're going to take the pitch, decision inhibition. So, you can't take an MRI into a clubhouse. So what we did is we figured out a way to strike this happy medium between practicality and actually getting a relevant signal. So that's what our baseball profile is. And it's something that's available on a PC. It's available on mobile devices. On the PC, it's a neural and a behavioral assessment. We're starting to work on some training regimens, too, with repeated use. Excuse me. So you see a player wearing the cap there. What's on screen on the top left is the actual interactive interface that we've got for the profiles. So scrolling through that. It's also available on a mobile device. You can play the game on so behavioral data being captured only on a mobile device. So I can show it to you on an iPhone if you want to see later. The bottom two screens are showing you what the pitch simulation looks like now. So this is a 3D simulation. The left screen is strike recognition. You see a strike zone pop up. There would be 4 corners showing you the strike zone. And then the pitch comes. These are real major league trajectories, real strike zones from a real game, from publicly available PitchFX data. The right screen is showing you the pitch recognition game. So they get a cue ahead of time that says, like, in this case, fastball could be coming, and then the pitch comes, and the player has to decide if that was a fastball or not, right? And so by collecting this data and by iterating on this data, we've seen a lot of uptake in both professional and college level. There we go. Whoop. So just to speak a little bit to uptake on this. Professional and colleges have also been using this. We started with NCAA, very quickly went to Major League, and have had growing use there. At this point, we've collected on 75,000 pitches, upwards of 30 million brain responses, and that's even grown since I wrote this slide. 7 teams at this point on the Major League level. We've probably talked to more than half of the league and are trying to figure out various ways of getting started with them. We asked the players what they think about this, and they gave us great React quotes, some of which I had up earlier. But we're scientists. We don't believe them, right? So we give them an anonymous survey, so no one's pressuring them to respond the right way or whatever. And we asked them, would you use something like this? Would you use this mobile simulated way of practicing to improve your at-plate decision-making? Nearly 8 out of 10 players said they would. Okay, this is across minor league players. It broke down in terms of most of them wanting to do it on both computer and mobile devices. Some preferring computer, some preferring only mobile. We asked them, what about the fidelity of the simulation? You guys saw it's just a ball coming on the screen, and it looks like it comes towards you in a pretty crude video game. We asked them to rate it on a scale of 1 to 10. Now, none of this data has been tampered with anything. On average, they said about 7.5 out of 10 in terms of fidelity, right? So these are real players who have seen real pitches, and they're looking at this video game, and they say, yeah, that's pretty much what it is. And why is that? It's because what we're doing is we're simulating the things that are relevant on a neural level, right? And it's something that they can take with them on a laptop, something they can take with them on a mobile device. And they also felt like they were pretty much getting better the more they did it, too. If you want to read more about us, there has been a lot of coverage. Reuters, Discovery Channel did a great kind of run-through on what the profile looks like, how it works. PBS had a nice interview, nice profile on SB Nation. Some of the initial NCAA users are shown here, and of course the professional teams are kind of mum's the word, so you'll just have to take my word. And that's it. So thank you. I guess we leave the 5 minutes for questions now. Is that right? Yeah, I think the mic's over here. But you want to yell it out, it's fine. Yeah, that's a great question. We get that a lot. Because, with virtual reality, everyone says, wow, it looks cool. What do we use it for? And when they look at our simulation, they say, man, it would look better with virtual reality, right? So that's definitely in our technology roadmap to go that route. But go back to that 7.5 out of 10 in terms of the players rating the fidelity of the simulation. That was on the 2D. So that was not even what you saw there. You've seen 3D that has shadow and that kind of stuff. We think we're even getting closer to maybe 8 out of 10. VR will push you even closer to 10. The thing is that I don't know how much that fidelity matters, to be honest. I mean, we're seeing a lot of correspondence to on-field metrics as is, but it's definitely in our roadmap to integrate VR at some point, and that's something, that kind of, first cut at the VR introduction to what we're doing is something that our, kind of like Cadillac plan teams get. Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering if there's anything nutrition-wise that players have tried to link to different parts of the brain to help them.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a complicated one because there's just a lot of stuff going on in the brain. I know that nutrition's kind of my enemy these days because some of the teams that are doing these like nutrition measuring programs with their players, they don't want to like overtax the players' attention with nutrition and brain stuff. Yeah. But like, I don't know, just get some good sleep and eat a good diet. I don't really know much about nutrition though, to be honest.
Okay, thanks.
Yes.
It occurs to me that this might be more useful to scouts, general managers, et cetera, in analyzing players than it would be for players trying to change themselves.
Yeah, I mean, it's not really exclusive one or the other. I mean, it's got the scouting potential 100%. Because you find a new player in some remote part of the world. How well does he recognize the slider? Well, you can measure it with this, right? How well does his recognition of a slider compare to so and so who's a new major league phenom, right? And so you can actually do that kind of apples to apples comparison now. So I think you're absolutely right that it does have tremendous scouting ability, and that's something that we're already seeing teams want it for. And so, we talked to a few teams last year before the amateur draft. Couldn't really get it together in time, but that could be something that is used this time around, especially because we got some NCAA players already. But, that kind of scouting cut of saying, like, yes, this guy is deciding on his sliders here, is the first level of analysis. When it comes to a player, they want to get better, right? And so they're going to then want to use that first cut to say, all right, what do I have to do in order to make that, closer to what the major league phenom was, right? Yeah. Yeah, our profiles, here's the thing. What we're measuring is how well they can predict the trajectory of the ball. So when you say like vision, for instance, what we're talking about, you mean like 20/20, that kind of stuff? Well, so that's contrast sensitivity. And let's say this is all of hitting, right? Contrast sensitivity is a part of that. It's a slice, right? There's no question. And in terms of how the visual system functions, contrast sensitivity has a place in the visual system. It's in the primary visual areas. And so, but the primary visual areas, they have to communicate with the object recognition, which has to communicate with the motion recognition, which has to then communicate with the motor side, right, about whether you swing or not, right? So vision is definitely a part of this. It's kind of baked in, so to speak, where we're actually taking the vision, the object recognition, the motion recognition, all that stuff, and all collapsing it down to, did they decide strike or ball? Or did they decide that it was a slider or not a slider, right? So yes, it's baked in. It's definitely a part of it, and I know that vision training, contrast sensitivity training, to be more exact, has been a major part of vision stuff in baseball for the last 30 years. I know some people have been doing this quite a bit, but they're measuring a slice of the process, right? And so it's taken like 30 years at this point to gather enough data that relates to on-field metrics in their case, right? Why? Because they're further away from the trajectory prediction signal on the neural side, right? We're actually right on top of that, decision prediction signal, right? So that's why we can get away with like 8, 10 points and see this great fit on a leave one out basis. Yeah.
Does this have any utility for player representatives?
You mean like agents?
The Scott Borases of the world.
Yeah, I think it does. When we first started doing this, we've heard no one's ever going to do this a lot of times. And the first no one's ever going to do this was agents will never allow you to do this to their players. And so, but I think actually this could be a tremendous tool for an agent, right? You go and find a player in a remote part of the world, and maybe he's not even playing baseball. right? You give him this test and you find out he's amazing at picking out Dallas Keuchel's balls and strikes, right? Let's get this guy hitting, teaching him how to swing a bat, right? Because he knows where the ball is going, right? So if you're a scout, you want that. If you're an agent, you want that. When it comes to the agents, I think, if they're mostly representing already major league players, they don't want anything that could potentially devalue their player, right? But there are two answers to that question. One is, well, if they're already playing in the major leagues, we're not going to find out with this test that they don't have like the hitting ability. They clearly do. It's just a question of where they are in terms of that spectrum. When you're a player who's not yet signed to representation, right? So you're a minor leaguer and you're trying to work your way up, this could actually be a way that the representative is going to find you faster, right? Or the way you're going to contact the representative and say, hey, I did amazing on the deCervo baseball profile. You should take a look at me, right? So it's a kind of way that, I think they're starting to use in NCAA, like the TrackMan stats for like exit velocity for golfers. I think something kind of similar like that is a possibility for player reps. I think we had one over here. Yeah. Altitude? How does altitude impact neural pathways? Well, if it's higher altitude, there's less oxygen. So, yeah. No, I mean, it's obviously something you can measure very precisely here, right? And you can then project it exactly into, how well is he deciding on curveballs at Mile High versus how well is he doing it at Yankee Stadium, right? So you can very very clearly I think measure that, but it's I don't know, to be honest, but oxygen is involved. So that's the last question. Vince and Mark are giving me the hook, but feel free to grab me afterwards. Also, our business operations guy, Peter Schwartz, is here, so feel free to grab us if you want to talk more. We're ready. So thank you.